in this session, we'll basically be exploring beliefs and barriers affecting women. Today, I have a wonderful guest from the Center of AIDS and Gender from the University of Pretoria, Vuyisa Mamanzi, who was born and grew up in Gugulethu, a township located just outside Cape Town. She obtained her undergraduate and postgraduate education at the University of the Western Cape. Vuyisa has an anthropological background, and one of her first research projects looked at unemployment and its impact on being a real man, a study investigating coping strategies utilized by men living in Gugulethu. She has also worked as a research assistant at the School of Public Health Management Studies at the University of Cape Town. Her work has involved transcription, data analysis, and conducting in-depth interviews on projects that focused on childbearing, family planning, and the relationships among women living with HIV in Gugulethu. Vuyisa joined the Center for Sexuality, AIDS and Gender team in January 28 as a project manager and is a researcher and has worked across many projects, including being a subject matter expert for the Gender Equality Changemaker program here at Digital Frontiers. I'm happy to have Vuyisa talk about mainly what privilege is, and just to share a bit. When we think about privilege, we need to think about as something that refers to certain social advantages, benefits, or degrees of prestige and respect that an individual has by virtue of belonging to certain social identity groups. I would like to hand over to Vuyisa. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Keneilwe, for that humble introduction. Thank you so much, and greetings to everyone who has joined us. I am a bit nervous, please bear with me. So even before I start with the presentation, I attended a number of sessions yesterday. And as I was preparing for my presentation today, and also reflecting on some of the sessions and conversations that I listened to yesterday in talking about gender and working towards gender equality, I remember getting excited every time a speaker used the words interconnectedness, interdependence, human connections, human capital, human-centered approach, inclusivity, and talking about the ethics of care. And what I'm going to ask from you today is that if you don't remember anything about this presentation today, there are two ideas that I would like you to take away from this conversation. The idea of thinking about yourself and organization as incomplete and mobile. Why incomplete and mobile? Incomplete because we are always in search for new knowledge and new ways of being in order to enhance ourselves. This incompleteness pushes us to be mobile in terms of our curiosity. The need to be mobile is the way of discovering ourselves and taking ourselves out to encounter others, as we are doing right now. We need to be mobile in ways that suit the challenges of the moment. It is important to see the investment in mobility as central to being and becoming gender equal and a just society. So that is my request of you, to just take those ideas away from this conversation. Keneilwe, may we go to the next slide? Thank you. So as Keneilwe has mentioned, our entry point for today's conversation is privilege. What we will be exploring are beliefs and barriers affecting women. And now my presentation is twofold. I have accessed some data from UN Women that looks at the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot 2022. This report shares where women are currently and the state of women and girls in our society in present day. Previous slides, Keneilwe. So that would be the first part of my presentation, just for us to get a view and an understanding where we are currently. Then the second part of the conversation, we are going to dive into gender privilege, looking at the benefits of being male in our society, and to a certain extent shed some light on some of the social norms that keep gender inequality intact. So what does the data show us? The data shows that the world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. Women's representation in positions of power and decision-making remains below parity. Women's representation across political and economic leadership remains far from equal. At the national level, women hold just 26.4% of parliamentary seats globally. In the economic sector, as of 2020, women hold 28.3% of managerial positions. It is estimated that 736 million women have experienced physical or sexual violence at least once in their lifetime. The report estimates we are 21 years from universal laws banning violence against women and 286 years from gender equality in legal frameworks. In the workplace, things are even worse, with gender parity in management remaining 140 years away. Gender-based discrimination has long kept women and girls subordinate to men in the workplace, in politics, and at home. In some countries, such discrimination persists in the law, legally barring women, for example, from certain professions, while in others, economic barriers like the gender pay gap prevent women from experiencing full equality. Now, lessening the unpaid burden on women and girls will require two kinds of changes. Traditional gender roles must give way to a redistribution of household labor, with men and boys taking responsibility for an equal share. Now, gender privilege is one of our key challenges. Increased understanding of the issue can pave the way towards leveling the playing field among genders. Now, let us look at privilege and how it operates and how men benefit from this privilege. According to Ellen G. Johnson, privilege refers to any advantage that is unearned, exclusive, and socially conferred. Now, I want us to focus on the term unearned. So it is something that is just given to you without you having to do anything. A family, a workplace, a society is a system of privilege and is organized around three basic principles. Dominance. A system of male privilege, for example, is male dominated, which means the default is for men to occupy positions of power. Identification, meaning that male identification could mean that a society, a workplace, defines male as the default standard for forms of excellence, as the highest attainment of the category of human or being human. male-centeredness. Male-centeredness is the tendency to make men the center of certain kinds of attention. If you look at business magazines, in news stories, as expert commentators, as the main character in a movie, male-centeredness operates to keep men central in our perceptions of success and power. And it makes it seem normal and even reassuring when a man is in charge. Now, this advantage is unearned in the sense that one does not have to do anything to achieve it. It is simply present. The advantage is socially produced. Men are not biologically determined to be leaders. Society has decided that men are more suitable as leaders based on ideas of tradition, culture, faith. In general, men have more advantage and power in social, cultural, economic, faith, and political matters. In general, women have less of those kinds of power. Exceptions, of course, exist, but privilege works to make male success more likely and women's success more exceptional. Now, we can't be neutral about privilege because it is socially wired into us and exists even if we see it, experience it, or collude with it or not. Now, it is much better, we suggest, to acknowledge privilege and do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vuyisa. This was such a great presentation, and like we said, touches really a lot about privilege and understanding where male and female are. And I think the one thing that really stood out for me is that it's unearned. It's very unearned. And I know right now we do talk about men specifically and the privilege that they have, but I am interested, and I think it's a topic that has been going on for a very long time. If you can touch on what is actually, when we speak about white privilege.
Let me breathe. Let me breathe. Thank you, Keneilwe, for that question. It is a difficult question to answer, particularly as a Black woman. And I'm going to be honest. It does unsurface for me some discomfort. You know, I remember it in one of the presentations or panel discussions yesterday. One of the speakers said, sometimes it is easy to confront or speak about a matter with someone who looks like you, right? Now, I'm aware that in this space, there's everybody, right? And I ask myself, am I the right person to speak about white privilege? Yes, there are those questions, those feelings of discomfort, and I thought that let me share my discomfort because I mean I think in having these conversations, honesty is important and transparency is important. Now, when thinking about privilege and also talking about privilege, I like the work or referencing the work of Chabani Mangani, who states that for every human being in the world, there are two schemas that anchor your being in the world, an individual schema and a sociological schema. So my individual schema, for example, as Vuyisa Mamanzi, gives me a sense of self. I, as a Black person, view myself as hardworking, dedicated, honest. I view myself as a law-abiding human being. But there is a schema that is opposed to the individual schema. A schema that is not mine, but societal. This is what Chabani Manganyi calls the sociological schema. Here, there is a certain view of you, me, in society as a Black person, which does not correspond to your individual schema. So as a Black person, there's a view of you, or a schema, particularly in South Africa, that says you are lazy, you are given to lying, you are sexually permissive, you are intellectually lacking, so forth and so on. We can think of many stereotypes. And indeed, that is how the world relates with you as a Black person, on the basis of the sociological schema. And already you can see that there is conflict in the individual schema and the sociological schema. However, now when a white person says I, they are invoking a much larger reservoir. They are invoking what the world thinks of a white person. Generally, when you think of a white person, Keneilwe, what do you think? You think intellectual capability, you think morality, you think of a cultured person, you think of all of these attributes. So this reservoir is not only culturally, moral, or about intellect, but it is also built over time through particular knowledge systems. To add on, I will say that, I think a conversation to have around white privilege and how I like to enter the conversation is to first say, I, as a Black, educated and employed woman, inhabit South Africa in a way that recognizes and acknowledges that I have some power. A mature conversation on race also recognizes that there are different types of power and that there are shades and nuances about power, and that when I, as Vuyisa, can accept my own privilege, that in South Africa today, there is a buffer and a cushion for being an articulate Black person. And that is power, and and recognizing and accepting and to be willing to acknowledge that is powerful, and I can have a conversation about some of my own privileges. We can then all enter into conversations where we begin to question our own privilege, power, and positionality.
Thank you for that, Vuyi. And I mean, obviously these things, like you say, they start from the individual and then they expand into society. And as they expand in society, I think we need to always think about organizations. And it's part of the reasons why actually there's even Pathway 17. We're talking about organization. We're talking about real things that affect people. So in your opinion, like, how would you address gender privilege in organization? And although, like in the previous question, I focused on one particular privilege, but everything has a ripple effect. Everything is intersectional. So how do we make sure that we do address gender privilege in organizations?
I think what is important, and I think in my introduction when I started, I alluded to this when I was reflecting on some of the conversations that we had yesterday. You know, when we were talking about interconnectedness, interdependence, human capital, inclusivity. And I think it is important for organizations to start having these conversations internally, you know, for us to sort of unpack some of the harmful gender norms included in the gender privilege. So to advance equal opportunities in the workplace, we need to understand the root causes of gender inequalities and why they persist. And one of the key factors is, again, gender norms in society and within our own organizations. Gender norms have been used for centuries to justify limiting or barring women success to the labor market and certain jobs. And I mean, we need to be knowledgeable about these things. We need to be aware of how these things manifest within our organizations, right? So conversation about these issues is needed, and it should not be an add-on conversation. These conversations should be institutionalized within our organizations, and they should form part of the organizational culture. Because what these conversations can unearth, right, is that they can make you aware, again, in terms of how these harmful gender norms manifest and how it is that they have become naturalized. Again, we talk about things that are taken for granted. For example, the ways in which domestic and care responsibilities are primarily assigned to women, and how this then limits the amount of time that women can dedicate to their careers. I mean, these conversations can also unearth the ways that harmful gender norms apply to men. We know that in many societies, men are expected to be the main breadwinner and suffer stress and stigma if they cannot live up to that ideal or role, right? So we can have conversations with men, asking them, you know, about their stresses, you know, what does it feel like? What are their experiences, right? So this is some of the strategies that organizations can apply in terms of dealing with gender privilege. Yeah. And I think also what is important for organizations to do is to value the voices of women, and women should speak with authority, and also in doing the work, right? Men need to be challenged aggressively in their gender politics in order to impact the work that they do. And I think also what is important is that we also need to undo our adherence to patriarchy, because patriarchy is not only about men, it is about women as well. Patriarchy is a system. Patriarchy is a system, and as women, we also collude with the system.
Yeah.
Thank you. We also collude. Our colleague just brought me water.
Yes. Yeah, just adding on to that, Vuyisa, we do collude with the system and how everything is put together. And I think one of the strategies that we always talk about is also gender mainstreaming in an organization, how we can actually identify this, because I think privilege is one of those things that a lot of people don't see. You don't see how it negatively impacts you or how it positively impacts you. And one thing that I'm always thinking about when it comes to privilege is that it's not a negative thing. It's about basically also being in an organization where you understand that I am privileged, therefore this is how I can help, or this is how I can teach. And a lot of the times we are bashing people that are privileged, and yet that should not be the case. It's through education, it's about through speaking about these things. So I think it's one of those things that are very important. There are conversations to be had, but gender mainstreaming is one way to touch on it, so that we can actually see that there is a particular factor. There's a difference with somebody who is, if I can say, a Black person who's coming from far away in the township and they are taking a taxi basically to work, versus if I can say I'm driving there to work. It's going to be different. It's going to be different in how tired I am, what time I have to wake up. So those are the little nuances that we need to think about in our organizations and how we can make life work. Thank goodness some of us are working remotely. So some of these things or barriers have been, if I can say, mitigated. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and also like talking about male privilege and also talking about patriarchy and how patriarchy is a system, and that some of us, we collude with patriarchy. And I think also the objective of these conversations should also be around the idea of rejecting dominance, not only rejecting male dominance, but domination, period, right? So how does this work look like? How does it look like? How do we engage men in conversations around gender equality and male privilege? How do we work with men who are already doing the work in the space, right? Some people advise that compassion and affirmation for those men who are already in the space and doing the work. Why compassion and affirmation? So that these men can go and convince and persuade other men to be part of this conversation, so that they can work towards eradicating gender inequality. Because we know when we talk about this type of work and when we have conversations of this nature, majority of the time, the burden falls on women. And gender work is not only about women. When we reach gender equality, everybody benefits. Definitely. Right? So it is definitely the work of all of us, because we stand to benefit.
Yes. No, thank you so much, Vuyi. And just to wrap up our call, I think it's very important for everybody to remember that I think where we are is that it is a privilege to have allies, have our male allies in itself. So that's a wonderful thing, and we need to keep using everybody, and it's gender is for everyone. So I'd like to thank you so much for coming to this session and conversing with us. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the CSA&G, for being there in terms of just giving us guest speakers. This has been a wonderful time, and thank you so much, Vuyisa, for your time.
Thank you, Keneilwe.
Thank you.
Thank you.